invite, even the time, of course, is tyrannic. That we can make questions and comments that are related to this panel, but if other questions in the panel are considered, it's not a problem, because I think that the other panelists that are not now on the table can in any case give answers. So
that's a lot
Hello.
of light.
yeah, someone should. We
here.
need to know when someone ups his hand, because
Okay.
we don't see anything here.
Okay,
I
so
can say.
listen. If you cannot
okay.
hear, use another sense.
yeah.
Okay. This is a question about Bitcoin and about this whole thing. It seems to me that we are facing a huge risk of capitalistic mimesis, so hiding into our activities. And we need really to distinguish very well the fields. So this is very crucial, because I was reading a few days ago on the Wall Street Journal, there was this article called The Uberization of Finance, in which basically everybody in some little time will become the usury he always dreamed to become. That is to say, on a peer-to-peer basis, you can, lend money, get back, fix your interest rate, and so on and so forth. So, and that was clearly experimented out of models of sharing, of crowdfunding, for example, that started with a very sort of innovative and revolutionary purpose, and then it becomes that. Similarly, a lot of co-working activities, a lot of this, they became Uber, they became Airbnb, they became basically other ways to extract value from friendship, from relationship, from all of that, which to me, this puts a fundamental question about the way in which we can use the internet in general as a tool of liberation. Because a lot of these proposals, when they try to get at a relevant, broad scale, are deeply dependent on the net. They cannot function without it. But yet the net is actually itself the product of the concentration of power of governments on the one hand and of capital on the other. And usually the tools that are produced by a structure that is the polar opposite of the one that we're in need of, which is diffusion of power and not concentration, they end up working in a very different way that we expect. So I think we should be very, very careful from this point of view, and also a little bit about, it is true what Tiziana was saying, that we have to deprofessionalize basically the business of the economist as much as we have to deprofessionalize the business of lawyers, as I was saying before. But doing that requires a different purpose and requires a positioning in front of capitalist extraction that needs to be extremely radical, because otherwise we kind of get fascinated by things that end up working the other way around.
There was some hands up here.
Hello. Can I ask my question? Is that possible? Okay. I guess it's similar to what he just said, but it's interesting to talk about alternative currencies, but no one seems to be talking about redistribution of wealth or the organization of society with regards to work and labor. And I feel like it's kind of taken for granted that there will always be kind of a group of people that are doing, let's say, the dirty work for us, like it is right now in capitalism. The poorest of society are always doing the reproductive labor. And for example, the feminist argument of the 70s that, work in the home is actually labor, and uncompensated labor. And I haven't really felt this coming out of any of your presentations, so I just wonder if that comes into your thinking about alternative currencies, but also about alternative economy, and also that no currency can ever be a replacement for, let's say, environmental damage done by industry, or a substitute for psychological or physical damage caused by the labor that we're doing. And I have another point. And right now I feel like there's a huge discrepancy between a body of people who operate in a material economy, and so not connected to the digital economy, and between those who operate in the digital economy, which is the opposite of a material currency, which is kind of based on scarcity, and the sort of, but the economy operating via algorithms, which is the opposite of scarcity. It's about like infinite reproduction. So there's this huge discrepancy between people stuck sort of in a material economy of work and compensation for their hours, and people who are operating in like the realm of finance, capital, speculation, etc. So yeah, those are my points.
So we have time for 2 more questions, but sorry, very brief. Here are 2 hands up, just waiting for since before. No, fair.
Okay.
We are gentlemen.
Thank you. It's a kind of philosophical question. I happen to practice a bit of these alternative coins, let's say, myself. And we know that from the experience of Argentina's alternative coin, when something grows big, becomes a threat to the system, so it has to get down. So I want this thought to try to combine it a little bit with the alternative coins and the ethical banks. Is there any future connections, collaborations, rearrangements between ethical banks that exist now with bitcoins or all other alternative coins as a net of safety against a system?
Ethical what? Bank.
Ethical bank.
Ethical banks.
Thank you. That is the last question, unfortunately, but we have no more time.
Taking into consideration the criticality of the situation now, taking into consideration the criticality of the situation in Greece now, and from your knowledge, would you put any of your tools at work immediately here in Greece now?
Sorry, I didn't hear that. I didn't hear the last question. I was typing the previous ones.
If any of the tools I was talking about could be implemented in Greece now. Oh.
So we have 3-4 minutes to answer. So I can see that, as usual, we can reverse the order. So Tiziana, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think maybe I can start with Ugo Mattei's question. I think obviously that's completely crucial, the question he asked. The article, which was actually a very long article, I think it was in the Economist. The Wall Street Journal, you're right, the Wall Street Journal, which came out quite recently, indicates what's the general trend of the financial industry. I mean, they see in the blockchain technology something which is going to really help them to disrupt. They see that the disruptive technologies which is going to help them to extend even more the reach of financialization. So it's absolutely crucial to identify the fact that we are not talking about technology which is intrinsically something which is going to bring in more autonomy, that is going to be very much about invention and the kind of values that you encode in the technology, the kind of social societies that you can involve with it. Because I do not believe that we talked about this before, maybe the first time we met a few years ago, about that the internet or computers are tools which were invented by capital and the state, but it's very much been a co-creation, between capital and the state, and kind of cognitive labor, biocognitive labor, material, technical. There's always been that kind of tension rather than just being, purely commissioned by state and capital. And I think one of the things that we might start doing, and this is something I'm interested in with in the context, for example, of Robin Hood, which is moving in that kind of area, is understanding in which way a kind of use of blockchain technologies and forkings, which is about fighting against capitalism and not expanding it. In which ways does it differ at the level of value and at the level of design? 2 points which usually come up is the emphasis given on to the centrality given to the individual as rational economic agent in neoclassical theory, which is completely consistent with the ways in which it can be appropriated by financial institutions. And the second point is, of course, points of accumulation, whether it allows for points of accumulation like Uber or Airbnb, which decentralize the housing and transportation infrastructure without making it common, but basically just externalizing the risk. So it's a big issue, and I don't wanna go into the other questions, not to take time from others.
No, just to remark, I totally agree with Tiziana, because, and this was also the intention of my intervention before. Algorithmic machine and like Uber and whatever are already controlling our life, are already inside the infrastructure. And that's why in this moment, this technological control is a challenge also for the ones that want to self-organize and keep the value or manage the value. And this is the point. And maybe we have also to drag value, but in this moment, in this age, I think only if we are able also to face this technological design, this relationship in between machine and information.
Super short. Answer to your question. We can. So the software I'm talking about is going to be ready, but ready as a product in June next year. In January, we start prototyping with the pilots community. I'm just happy to hear that here in Athens, because I would just be happy. The problem is courage. If there is courage enough to go to that direction here in this kind of situation, thinking about the referendum in July. I mean, I'm not doing politics, but it's more than the software. Okay.
The famous question of the second way, the second alternative.
Okay, well, I'll be very brief because the questions weren't really for me, but no one else has not spoken. Bitcoin, it seems to me, strips off the transactional character of money as something to be spent from its financial role as an asset that provides liquidity, because money is precisely what does not have to be spent. The great appeal of Bitcoin, I think, is that as a form of neo-metalism, it prevents the expansion of the money supply algorithmically while cutting out the nexus between states and banks, which is inflationary. And I think as a transactional entity that can be used only by being spent rather than being hoarded, as it were, having these devices would be crucial to the kind of resistance to a liquidity crisis or rather the imposition of a kind of liquidity crisis, that a strike, I mean, you can't do what I'm talking about unless you have these resources for survival. So I'm all for it. On the other hand, I do think that it's important to understand how this relates, and this gets to some of Tiziana's points, to gift relations. One of the things that's theoretically important about the Bitcoin phenomenon is that getting credit in the form of internal currency for various personal attributes and good deeds is a way of attaching value to those acts in just the way, but alternatively to the way in which having options is supposed to do. In other words, this is a direct alternative to options theory. In a sense, that is very important, going back to what others have said and what Andrea said earlier this morning, to the difference between gift relations and exchange relations. A number of my colleagues in the Rethinking Capitalism project, the anthropologists among us, have argued that the interesting thing about gifts is not that they are proto-exchanges, it's that gifts give you options. They are contingent claims that depend upon volatility changes for their value. And the problem of capitalism is essentially how you can create hedges in the sense that gifts are hedges without hoarding. Now, finance gives you a technique for measuring, for creating hedges which are monetizable and which are exchangeable, and that provide you with investment alternatives to hoarding money. The question I'm going to ask, and I'm not going to give anybody time to answer, is essentially what happens in a Bitcoin-based society when you can't hedge, because the credit that you get is only of value if it's spent and not if it's hoarded.
Thank you very much. Before ending, stop a moment. Before ending, I would like to thank the simultaneous translators and the simultaneous translation, because they did a very hard job for 5 hours. And I would like to thank all the organization, because we spent 5 hours for this session, very deep. And I hope that this session could be considered fruitful for tomorrow, but not only for tomorrow. Maybe to think for a plan B, a plan C to solve a lot of problems. Thanks to all.